Hello and welcome to the Sharpening Report. I am your host, Josh Peck. Tonight we have a very special guest, Gary Wayne, in the final entry of a series of interviews we've been doing with him over the course of the past few months, based on his new book, The Genesis 6 Conspiracy Part 2, How Understanding Prehistory and Giants Helps Define End Times Prophecy. And I'm very excited for tonight's show because we're going to get into some prophecy. But before we get to that, if you're viewing on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button and click the bell to turn on all notifications. And if you think that you're already subscribed, double check, because a lot of people have been telling me YouTube is removing their subscriptions, so you might have to resubscribe. Okay, so let's get into it. Pleasure to have you back again. How are you doing, Gary?
Doing very well, and happy to be back with you, and looking forward to the conversation. I always like to talk prophecy, so it's I like giants too, but I have more than one passion.
Yeah, same here, and I totally agree. And I think this one is a perfect cap for the past three episodes that we've done in this series, and all of which are on YouTube, and the full versions are on Daily Renegade. So, and I think it really helps knowing the prehistory stuff, because it helps define prophecy for us. So on your website, you offer excerpts of, and that's Genesis6conspiracy.com, and the six is the actual number six. So on your website, you offer excerpts of each chapter of your new book. And to open section 6, you write, post-Diluvian history was shaped by the six beast empires and will once more be shaped by the end time seventh and eighth beast empires. Can you give us a brief overview of the first six empires that will lead into the seventh and eighth?
Yeah. So one of the things that struck me as I dug deeper and deeper into the Bible is that there was a relationship between the end time and with prehistory, and that understanding prehistory would provide context for what happens in the New Testament and with the Old Testament end time prophecy. And so that's what's interesting, about book 2 is that I think for the first few sections, it's absolutely essential information for Christians to understand how much information is provided about prehistory. And then, as I do that, I'm identifying key terms and words that will be providing additional context for end time prophecy, because if we look at Ecclesiastics, where it tells us that not only is nothing new none under the sun, but what was will be again. And additionally, as you move on into, I think, verse 17 or 18 there, it says that, the understanding of this wisdom and this knowledge will bring grief and sorrow. That we need to understand that what happened in prehistory before the flood happened again after the flood. We didn't get to the point of that apocalypse, but we do in the end time. And that there is an ordained time, and God intercedes to ensure that all the names in the book of life written in there before creation have an opportunity to have a chance to leave their name in that book or have it blotted out. And so there is an ordained time. But that doesn't diminish the fact that we're told it will be also like the days of Noah in the larger context of Noah's generation, which was 600 years before the flood, 150 and 350 after. So understanding prehistory helps us to understand these beast empires. And so we get beast empires, and one would presume there was these beast empires before the flood with the giants, because it's the same pattern. They're always trying to bring about an antichrist figure. And one deduces then there would have been an antediluvian antichrist figure. And depending on which model you might get out of polytheism, it would seem that maybe Atlantis would fit that the best with Atlas. Now, there's some other versions that might have been a giant named Orion in the occult and things like that, but it's a constant that they want to do this, and they want to destroy humankind from the face of the earth, and they want to do this again, and they've been trying to do that ever since. So understanding the beast systems or the beast empires is very, very important. And I label them the beast empires as they're labeled in Daniel 7, where we get the empires moving forward, but not the ones previous. So what we're being provided in those beast empires, and it's the same ones provided in Daniel 2 in the metallic empires, but when we get into Revelation, we see the beast of the sea, of the Gentile nations. And one of the things that we need to understand in context with the beast empires is that they all have an intimate relationship with Israel. It's part of the fulfillment of Israel's destiny. And it can either be done through the blessings of the covenant or the curses of the covenant. Unfortunately, we get the curses, because of the violations against Israel, that it will be played out accordingly. So when we look at who these beast empires are, these are the bloodline dynastic orders of the Rephaim hegemony after the flood, which is why it's important to understand all of these nations. They take over the thrones. And so if you look at the metallic empires, where it gives the same four empires, and I'll just name those empires just to get them on the table, is it starts with Babylon, and it's the head of gold in the metallic ones. And you have, following that, Persia and Medes, essentially the same. One comes, takes over from the other, and it's similar intermarriage of the bloodlines and the transition of who's going to be the emperor there. And then you have Greece that follows, and then you have Rome, and then in the end time empire, you'll have 10 kings that rise from the Roman Empire, which is the seventh empire, and the eighth empire is Antichrist, as he's called in the last 3.5 years in Revelation 17. So that's 5 of the 7, right? And then the eighth is the one that comes at the end. So who are the first two? Well, the first one is Egypt. And the reason why we understand Egypt as the first one, it's in relationship with Israel. I'll come to the next one where you can make an argument, but I will always go back to this intimate relationship with Israel. Israel is raised into a nation in Egypt. They get the protection and they get the benefits of this empire that is the most powerful nation at that time until the Pharaoh changes. Until the Pharaoh that Joseph didn't know, and he was equal to Pharaoh at that time. So there's a change, and that's when the persecution sort of starts. And not that, relatively speaking, it's going to be decades. You're going to have the exodus into the land of the covenant. So that's Beast Empire number 1 in the relationship. The second one is in relationship to after the land of the covenant is taken, after the age of the judges, once the monarchy has been in place, you get the Assyrian Empire. And you could maybe take a beast empire back to Nimrod from Babel, and he's the father of the Assyrian nations and the Mesopotamian kingships, and his bloodlines will run through that. But Babel did not have an intimate relationship with Israel. So it's an extension of Babel, but it's the Assyrian Empire followed by Babylon and Persia, which are again akin to the Babel Empire. But Babel is the understanding for Antichrist as an archetypical figure with Nimrod, having complete control of the Noahites. Babel is the root word for Babylon, as we get that as it shows up. It's the religion of Nimrod, and the daughters of Babel or Babylon, which are the religions of the beast empires moving forward. But it's I lean to Assyria as being the defining nature, because in 721, through the curses of the covenants, with the violations of the covenant, the northern tribes are taken into exile. Judah would have gone as the southern kingdom, and they split after King Solomon. For people wondering where I'm getting two nations from here, they split into the northern and the southern nations after King Solomon. And Judah repents. So they get a stay of the curses, providing they're going to keep following the covenant. So Assyria takes Israel into dispersion, into exile, and then they get lost into the four corners of the earth. They're spread right across the earth, and we won't hear about them until the end time, once the seventh empire arises, expect lost Israel to start to awaken, probably with the 144,000. And I think one of the markers for that is that they come from the tribes of Israel. And they're going to be preaching to the whole world, but they're trying to awaken the lost tribes in preparation for reconciliation and Exodus in the second half. And so the next thing that I would sort of add on to this is that the southern kingdom will fall under the curses of the covenant under Babylon in about, say, circa 589 BC, plus or minus 2 or 3 years either way on the dating, and they're going to be taken into exile. And then under the Persian kings, they're going to be permitted to go back. And then under the Greek Empire with Alexander, they're going to reign over Israel, as they do everywhere. And they're going to actually do a kind of abomination as a prototype for the end time, not the or the ha abomination, using a mix of Hebrew and English, whereas in ha Elohim, or ha Satan, it's the, not, as a definite, as the one we want to stay focused on. Just as you have in the time of Nebuchadnezzar, you get the statue that's going to be raised, and he also desecrates the temple. So we see these Antichrist wannabes through the beast empires trying to bring about this Antichrist, and that if it wasn't for Michael fighting against the beast empires, he doesn't prevent them from coming to power, but from Antichrist from coming to power until the ordained time. They would have brought this about beforehand, but they keep trying. And then so you have, after the Greek Empire, it gets split into 4 sections, and out of that is Rome, and Rome takes over and succeeds as the Iron Empire that's going to mix with clay in the end time. So in the time of the Roman Empire, you have the dispersion of and the destruction of Jerusalem in the time of the Messiah and the crucifixion. So you see this intertwining of Israel and the beast empires. They're wedded together, so that when the fruition of this age in the last 7 years, as Daniel 9:27, when all prophecy and vision is going to be fulfilled for this age, and excluding the millennium, which is another 1,000-year period, you're going to see another beast empire rise up. Now, this is not in conflict, as what some people will say, or an either or with Daniel 8, where they say that's where the 7 empires come from. It's both. So when it's using the Greek Empire against Persia at that time, and that Antichrist will somehow come out of the Greek Empire, but that includes Rome as well, as we just talked about. So it can't be too specific of where the Antichrist comes from, because it's a large area that the Greek Empire was. And so you have, in this analogy of what happens in Revelation, is you have Alexander and Greece as the first empire, split into 4 after his death is 5. Rise of Rome is 6. The end time empire that equally sort of will come from end time empires that will equally come from Rome and Greece, with a connection with the 8th empire to Antichrist with Greece. That is the same number. So it provides more information about the end time and the beast empires. And I think Revelation nails it as a beast, because it is this Hydra Leviathan type empire that comes out of the sea, which in biblical Old Testament prophecy are the Gentile nations. And that Israel tends to be sort of the earth, as sort of the other flip side to that coin, just as the northern tribes of Israel are understood as the vine in prophetic allegory, and the tribes even. So you can have that vine allegory expressed with specific prophecies to Ephraim as well, for example, as part of the northern kingdom. And the southern kingdom is the fig tree, and an allegory for why Jesus destroys the fig tree in the book of Matthew and Mark, because it's bearing no fruit. And then he goes into his finishing of his commission, and he starts to lay down the destruction of the temple, and then goes later, almost immediately after, from a chronology point of the Gospels, lays down the end time oratory. So you have this fulfillment coming with this Leviathan monster that's coming out of the sea, that's represented as a beast, just as Antichrist is also a beast of the beast empires. And it is showing that it has 10 horns or 10 kings, and it's the same empire that's shown in Revelation 13 that comes out of the sea, that's pictured in Revelation 12 at the time of the abomination and the war in heaven, and the attempted elimination of the people fleeing from Judea at that time. It's at the midpoint of the last 7 years, and the same depiction as the 10 kings and the 7, the 10 and the 7 empires that are shown in Revelation 17. So everything sort of comes together in that imagery for the end time. And not only will church prophecy be fulfilled in a parallel track, but covenant prophecy will be filled out in another parallel track that brings it to a nexus point at the Supper of the Lamb.
Yeah, it really shows how important prehistory and history is to our understanding of prophecy. And speaking of which, this is something that I've always been curious about, and I'm still kind of on the fence on, because I've heard so many good arguments on a lot of different ends. But when do you see the Gog and Magog war taking place, and what does that have to do with Meshach and Tubal?
Yes, great question. So there are several theories on the timing of Ezekiel 38 and 39, and we should read them as one prophecy. It's separated into 2 chapters. You just get sort of the beginning of the war, and then sort of the ending of the war in Ezekiel 39. But Ezekiel 39 has such juicy details in it that you want to make sure you read it all. So the one theory is that we get a Gog war mentioned in Revelation 20. So it's probably that war. From that sort of theory. And then the other one is the battle descriptions are so similar to Armageddon, it's probably the Armageddon battle. And I get that, and you can make a pretty good argument for it, except that it doesn't fit quite all the details, not only within the prophecy, but other prophecies. And for me, I think prophecy should fit like a glove, and there aren't any contradictions, and you should look for some of the timing markers that are in there. So in Ezekiel 38, we're told that this war happens in the last days, which is a common term used for the last 7 years, or the end time, throughout the Old Testament. So we know it's not at the end of the millennium by that sort of determination. But then when does it happen? And is it Armageddon? Well, when you get into the details of Ezekiel 39, it's talking about the destruction of this army. And then you have second Exodus. Well, people will say, well, that's Armageddon, and then the second Exodus will happen at the start of the millennium. Except that you have this other detail in Ezekiel 38 to sort of worry about and mesh, and then look at the other prophecies. So when you get into end time prophecy with second Exodus, you get this in the time of Jacob's trouble in Micah 37. And this is the same word, Hebrew sarah, as in the time of trouble in Daniel 12, when you have the resurrection of the dead that a lot of people sort of refer to as a church prophecy. But this is for Daniel's people. So it's not, it's for Israel. And there is a resurrection predicted for Israel and Judah, and it has to do with the second Exodus. And this time of trouble is the cognate word for the Greek word thalipsis, which is tribulation. And there's 2 different tribulations as are used in end time prophecy. There's one that's used for the first 3.5 years, maybe 3 years or so even before, for the tribulation of the saints. We see that showing up as afflicted in Matthew 24, about verse 7, that's the Greek word thlipsis, and it's the same word that's used to translate for tribulation. And so this is the tribulation of the saints in Revelation 7 that come out of the great tribulation of the saints, that the ones in Revelation 6 are the first fruits, are waiting for the additional martyrs to come out, and part of the first fruits that includes the 144,000 and the two witnesses for the resurrection sequence. Now, as we sort of move that forward to the Great Tribulation, as Matthew 24:21 talks about, it's a tribulation not seen since the creation of the world versus the tribulation of the saints. We have a parallel passage in Mark 13:21 that describes the same destruction not seen since the beginning of the world, but the word there is afflicted, which goes back to thlipsis as well. So understand there's two different words for tribulation. It means the same meaning as in Sarah, in trouble in the time of Jacob's trouble. It means tribulation. It means affliction. It means persecution. There's a persecution for the saints and a persecution for the tribes of Israel, but all are to be saved from the wrath, which is the year of the Lord's wrath. So the timing of the Exodus, the second Exodus, is after Antichrist has come to power. And that we get a lot of passages that come out of the Old Testament, particularly in Isaiah 27, 28, 43, and there's another one where you have this huge scourge that's going to sweep Israel and Exodus away, and they're being led by Jehovah, who I believe is the word Jesus, leading the Exodus along with King David, and probably Elijah is part of that as well, as part of leading Israel to the wilderness for their judgment and resurrection. And this happens after the time of the rapture. And this is a time when Jesus is going to break them out of their prisons in the time of the year of the Lord's favor. And so in Ezekiel 37, and the timing is kind of important as it associates with this other war, is that you get this resurrection of Israel. And this is and that's the dry bones. And then you get the second Exodus after that as part of the same passage. So you have a resurrection and you have an Exodus all there for this judgment that Daniel 12 is talking about. That's that time of Sarah or tribulation. And in Micah 37, this is the time of Jacob's trouble, but they're going to be saved out of it. So they're saved from the year of the Lord's wrath. So it happens in the year of the Lord's favor, in the year before the year of the Lord's wrath. So as we look at the timing and how that now fits into Ezekiel 38 and 39, it's suggesting a second half, and it's a reconciliation of Israel because they recognize Jesus as their Messiah and their Redeemer, and they repent in preparation for the second Exodus. And this happens after Jesus' sign, and they recognize them as the one that they pierced. And I walk through all of these kinds of details in section 7. And so now, if you look at those details, and it's before the war happens, before second Exodus, that is saying it's going to be either at the midpoint or before, because Armageddon follows after the second Exodus. So what other passages do we have that sort of align with this war? Well, Joel 1 and 2 is describing this war of this greatest army that's never been before, the largest ever. And it happens before Armageddon, which it moves on to the Armageddon battle after this war in Joel 3. So if you look at the distinctions, and there's mighty ones that are being talked about in each, another connection to some of the bloodlines and the Gibor, but I don't want to get down that rabbit trail here. I'll try and stay linking this all together. So what's interesting is about those creatures in Joel 1 and 2, which is this massive war that isn't Armageddon, is that they are identical to the war, identical to the chimera creatures of the riders and the horses in Revelation 9 that happens before the two witnesses are killed at the midpoint of the last 7 years, because it's the one who comes up out of the abyss who kills the two witnesses. And it's before the seventh trumpet, which happens, after the death of the two witnesses. You get the announcement of the days of the seventh trumpet in Revelation 10, but you get the two witnesses, and then I think 11:15, you get the trumpet blowing for the seventh trumpet, where it's going to complete all of the things for the trumpet. And so you have this war that's connected to the opening of the abyss. It's not directly saying any of these creatures come out of the abyss, but it's kind of an extension of it. It's not part of the first woe, but it's sort of kind of like a connection back to it. So this happens before the midpoint of the last 7 years, because Antichrist is going to be also connected in Revelation 17 as the one that comes up out of the abyss. There's a connection there. So the timing puts it in as the counterfeit Armageddon that Antichrist is going to require, and with a legitimate Antichrist figure, Gog, as you take that back to Hebrew and Greek, it's partly defined as an end-time Antichrist-like figure, and it's got to be so plausible, both the Antichrist and the war, that people will believe Antichrist is the Messiah. And this is the deception that even the elect will be deceived by. It will be so plausible. And this is the time of the temptation in trial in Revelation 3 that we're going to be saved from, which is the midpoint and the mark of the beast. So all of it sort of ties in perfectly with the timing if you let the pieces come together. So, yeah, it's such an interesting question. When is the timing of that war? Because it's so like the Armageddon war, but it's like, and this is in the trumpet, so this is the closest sort of size of catastrophe that you're going to get before all flesh would be killed, except that Jesus will step in. So as you go through the sorrows of the last years of catastrophes, of pestilence, famine, earthquakes, wars, and rumors of war, those get to be stronger and happen more quickly as we get through the generation. And if we were to have a war that killed 5% or 10% of the population of the earth and destroyed that much of the earth, that would be looked at as apocalyptic. But yet that's not going to be the Gog War or Armageddon. And once you get to the trumpets, it's 25% destruction. So there's going to be a war like that looks apocalyptic. And even so much so as the princes and the elite are going to hide in their underground caves and fortresses and tunnels because they think it's the day of the Lord, as Revelation 6, but it's not. There's still the trumpets to come. And then that's not Armageddon. There's still where everything would be destroyed. So it just sort of works sort of perfectly if you let the details and the chronology flow, and that chronology comes from Jesus.
Yeah, that is so fascinating. I've never heard of the Gog Magog war and all these other things being described as a type of false Armageddon, but that makes so much sense. And yeah, you're right. Think how deceiving that would be for people going through that time, and then they see the Antichrist supposedly as this savior or Messiah figure. And yeah, so it makes sense why, it's like 1 second they're hiding in the caves and it's the day of the Lord, and the next second they're not repenting of their idolatries and stuff. It makes a lot of sense. That's fascinating. You mentioned the mighty men. Who are the great and mighty men of the end times, and are the giants going to return during this time?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So, I mentioned in the Joel Wars that it mentions the mighty men or Gabor, but you also get the mighty men in the details of the destruction in Ezekiel 39, right? And so Gabor is used to describe giants in a lot of applications, not all, but a lot. And so there's an association there that I think we want to look for a cognate word in Greek in the New Testament. I always thought, and I'm a whiner, but I always thought it would be so much easier to connect the Old and the New Testament if they were both written in the original source language of Hebrew, so that you don't have to try and figure out, well, does this match with that? Because, you don't have the same words. You'd have that consistency if you did have it in both. So, yeah, there's some words that are used in the book of Revelation, like the kings of the earth and the great men, and they're used in Revelation 6 and Revelation 19 and Revelation 18, where it's mentioning this ruling elite. And those words tend to go back to Greek megas and megastranes are the two words that are used, and they're kind of related. And what they mean is great, yes, that's the first part. But as you take that back in its fuller meaning into Greek, in the etymology that goes with it, it means large, it means huge, it means chief, it means weighty as in stout, that I use as one of the descriptions, and as Antichrist is called stout. It means bloodline descendants. And then, Megastanes is basically lords and nobles and grandees. And grandees is sort of the key word from another Greek word, 3176, megistos. And it means very great and greatest. But as we look at megastranes, it's going to mean a word that means not only grandees of a kingdom, but also lofty and majestic and an old pedigree from a genealogical perspective. So what we're seeing is these kings of the earth and the oligarchs are bloodlines of the beast empires that are going to rule things. And these are the ones that are talked about in Revelation 6 that are running the world, and they think it's the day of the world. And these are the ones that are being slaughtered, not only in the war of the Gog War as the bulls of Bashan, but also as these mighty men, as they're called, and nobles and royals in Revelation 19 at Armageddon. And that term, bulls of Bashan. So you can look at that from the Ugaritic text perspective, that Bashan is at the foot of Mount Hermon. It's in the Mount Hermon region. And that the Baalim ruled from Mount Hermon, and they were called bulls. And so what's also interesting is that they had, as I cover off in the first half of the book, they had an assembly of the gods there, but also the assembly of the giants, the assemblies of the Datanu, which included the Rephaim. And Datanu, I won't go through the whole etymology, but it's connected to giants all around the world, from Tuatha De Danann to the Titans, as you understand, the transliteration of T's and D's as they go across cultures. So a D and a T can be the same pronunciation and the same letter. So Datanu, D-I-T-A-N-U, you could look at that as T-I-T-A-N-U, and Titan of the heavens, Titan. Anu is heaven in Sumerian. And so you have a council of these dynastic royales that are also called bulls. And so when you look at the term for giant as it comes from Nephilim, it can mean a giant, tribe of giants, a tyrant, or tyrannos, or bully. And so when you look at the larger definition to giant, because they were also called bulls before the flood, so they're the same term that goes with them after the flood. It describes these dynastic rulers as bullies and offspring of bulls. And so when you see bulls of Bashan in the Bible, you try and distinguish, are they talking about just disembodied spirits of the giants, or is it the fallen angels? And there's bulls of Bashan that are around the crucifixion at the time of Jesus. So this is a term that pops up more often than what people would know. Tyrannos, just out of interest, goes back to Anatolian for Indo-Aryan giant kings as Tarwanos, or with an A, T-R, as a transliteration, and to the Assyrian Gyges kings, which is rooted in the word giant, Gyges, and the Gyges kings that produce kings like Gog and Tubal, which are connected to the Ezekiel 38 and 39 war in Meshech, just as Gog is the chief prince of Gog of Magog, chief prince of Meshech. Gog, it doesn't have a standing within the Bible except in that prophecy. In other words, Magog is a patriarch from Japheth, but Gog doesn't show up. But Gog is a giant both before and after the flood. And before the flood, he's the son of Iapetus and Clydo, that produces Gog, Magog, and Albion. But giants after the flood often are named with the same name as giants before the flood, like Gilgamesh, born 6th generation after the flood, son of King Lugabanda and the fertility goddess Nin. And he also shows up as a Gilgamesh in the book of giants of Enoch before the flood. So again, we see this sort of constant if we look for some of those patterns. And so Tyrannos is the Herculides bloodlines of the Gyges kings, or Gyes as it would be in its plural nature. Hercules is the patriarch to that bloodline, son of Alchemy and Zeus after the flood. So you get all of these sort of connections that go back to the royales, and these are the mighty kings of the earth and the great men in the end time, as you look for Megastranes and Megas as being comparable words for the bloodlines of the Rephaim kings after the flood and for the mighty ones that would describe them. I know that was a lot of information.
Oh, no, it's absolutely fascinating. I just had to clear my throat for a second, so sorry for the pause. But yeah, no, that's fascinating, and I'm really glad that we've saved that for the end part of the series, because if people go back and watch the other 3 interviews that we've done, we've talked a lot about that too, and that'll help really flesh this out even more, which is great. And something else that you mentioned, and this has always been one of the most fascinating prophecies to me, and I don't know why this one specifically, but it's just always intrigued me. And I have a specific question for you about it that actually came from one of my viewers that I surprisingly did not catch until recently, and I'm curious to know your thoughts on it. But the first woe of the scorpion creatures. What can you tell us about these? What are these things? And you mentioned that you connect that with Joel, which I have too, and just for a brief, I'm gonna read a passage here about it, because I recently did a video about the connection between Joel and the Locust Army, and it gets into weird stuff like CERN and stuff like that. But it's a totally different video than this is. But in that, a viewer on the Daily Renegade website actually posted a question that I hadn't thought about before. So when describing these things in Joel, one of the descriptions, it says, a fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them is a desolate wilderness, yea, and nothing shall escape them. So it makes it sound like they're destroying the wilderness, yet in Revelation 9, it says that they're not permitted to touch any green thing or anything. So yeah, what are... Yeah. So, like, what are these things, and then how do you think about like those 2 passages?
Two different beings.
Okay.
Connected, but not the same. So, what we look at when we see, and I put this up in section 6 in a couple of the chapters for what I'm going to refer to as 2 columns. So I'll list the descriptions described in Joel 1 and 2. Side by side with the descriptions of the riders and the horses in Revelation 9 and the 200 million man war. They're identical. But these are not humans. These are like chimera creatures. They're physical chimera creatures. And they are part of the DNA manipulation, I think, part of the rising military technology, and probably clone bodies that are chimera-like or giant-like for the terrible ones who are in the pit prison, that are the disembodied spirits of the worst of the giants that are coming out, and also chimera bodies for disembodied spirits that weren't in the pit prison. And if you want to know the passage where you can look at these terrible ones as the as the Erit or the Eritim, as you go ones as in the plural, as in giant ones or Nephilim, or Rephaim and Seraphim, the serpent ones, and using the male plural. You have these ones that are slain on the earth for doing terrible things, and you have like Tubal and Meshach in there as well, right, that are going to come out from the pit prison when that pit prison is open. And I think they will be the leaders for this Gog war. And that you will also have let's call it a kind of being like the ancient understanding of a unicorn horse. That was a horse that giants rode on into battle. But this is different by the description. It's a different chimera. Unicorns were a chimera being, but they look different than this. But this is going to be an advanced technological creature for these beings to sit on and ride in. There's going to have advanced technical weapons, and they can destroy things that the ones who come up out of the abyss as physical beings, as opposed to disembodied spirits, aren't allowed to destroy the earth. So they're two different beings by the details. There's not contradiction, but they're and the descriptions of the ones that are the scorpion beings in that have first come out under the leader of Abaddon and Apollyon, their description is different than the riders and the horses. Subtle, but different. And the locust army is an allegory for a great army, and it's used several times, and I highlight that term locust armies and when they're used in the first parts of the book, and then we'll connect that into this Joel 1 and 2 war and how that connects into Revelation 9 and Ezekiel 38 and 39. So these things that come out are the other ones that Ezekiel 32 talks about that are in the pit prison, and that's the mighty, which is El, as in the fallen angels. And so these are fallen angels that are led by Abaddon Apollyon that, I make the case is Azazel is the leader of the Watchers, as we get that out of the book of Enoch. But whoever the leader is, he leads these crazy scorpion beings that are going to plague the earth and sting people for 5 months, and they're going to seek death but aren't going to be able to achieve death, and that the only ones that they're not allowed to punish are those with the seal of God on them. So we know that includes the 144,000 who have a seal, and I pray and hope that that is like the seal that we have as being faithful of Jesus, that we have the seal of God on us that will protect us. But there will be this destruction on the earth of these beings, and these are something that we don't really get told about in the Bible, but there is a key that they're a scorpion, and the Hebrew word for scorpion is a crab, A-C-H-U-R-A-B. Now, what's interesting about that is there are some beings that are talked about in Sumerian mythology, in Central American mythology and religious natures, and in Egyptian and other places around the world that describe a similar being. And they're called in Sumeria the Akraba Malu and or the Gerta Balu. And there's reliefs, etchings all over the Middle East with these creatures. And so what I do is I take those descriptions and I put them in one column of what comes out of Revelation 9 and these ones, and they're identical. So what are these things that are recorded in prehistory in other religions? Well, the standard sort of allegory of their history is that, and I'll use the Sumerian one, is that Tiamat, consort of Absu before the flood, created an order of warrior kind of beings, and they're called the Gerta-Balu or the Krabba-Malu, depending on which language you're taking that out of. And that they were created to protect the thrones. They were created to protect the palaces. They were created to protect the temples and the gateways to the other world. And so it's amazing that you have these beings that are identical to what the Bible talks about. So there must have been these beings in prehistory, and you also see these things in the Epic of Gilgamesh. So they're even around a short time after the flood, seemingly, and they have the power to destroy the world, which is why restrictions are put on them. And so I make a case that these might be cherubim, and here's how I get there. One is that if you look at Anunnaki release in the Middle East, you see them doing this ritual around this, what some people might term as a technology, or I've heard it as the tree of life as well, but they're doing rituals with these crystals or pine cones and these bags and stuff like that. And there's two different kinds of those depictions. It's the same ritual, just different kinds of beings, similar but different. The only difference, I mean, they both have wings, they're both of these stocky creatures or giant like. One has the face of a human that looks like a dark-haired Gilgamesh or Nimrod, as they're typically depicted as, and the other one has a eagle's or a bird face. Well, in these kinds of creatures, that is classified by some researchers as part of the Akraba Malu. And so cherubim have a bird face, a human face, a lion face, and a bull face. And when they take their physical form, create their oikotarian, they would take one of those heads. So the extension would be as if they had produced giants that say like a Gilgamesh, that maybe the mother goddess Nin was a cherubim and had a human face and passed on the dark hair and big dark beard versus the red hair and blonde hair. But if they had a bird face, then they would create offspring like that. But getting away from that sort of rabbit hole is, because I said that's almost a show in itself, but these aren't what walk out of the pit prison, even though they're equated by some researchers as the same. So we get another analogy that's in the Bible that I think helps explain who these are. The Watchers include seraphim, cherubim, ophanim, and archangels. And the seraphim we know as dragon-faced, serpent, six-winged angels. And then we get these really weird things that fallen angels like Azazel are equated with, which are goat gods, satyrs. And satyr is the Hebrew word, compounded word for a devil goat god, and it's compounded with sa and sarah for meaning hairy, and words like that, and air, and a hairy goat as well, and air, which is the Hebrew word for watcher, as watcher is translated from Daniel 4, out of air in Hebrew. So Sair is some sort of hairy watcher. Has to be one of the four. And yet in the occult, they have these goat gods that are associated with angels that we would understand as seraphim. So I think those are degraded seraphim. And not all of them went to the pit prison right away. But we see these goat gods show up after the flood. And we have satyrs talked about in the Bible in Isaiah 13 and Isaiah 34. And they're going to be back again dancing at the destruction of Babylon in Isaiah 13 and also in Isaiah 34. So I think they're coming out of the abyss. But also these other ones, and I think these are degraded cherubim watchers that did the same crimes as the seraphim watchers. So that's my speculation, but I lay a case out with the details and provide biblical passages that I think will surprise people.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, and I just love this stuff. I have more I want to ask specifically about the second and third woes, but before I do, where can people get your book and find you online?
Yeah, so the best way to find my book or get a hold of me is through my website at the Genesis6conspiracy.com. That's Genesis 6, the number 6conspiracy.com. And on that website, there's a contact the author. So, I have documents. I have one that's on the Akraba Malu, if people want that, for example. name it by topic or just ask a question. It'll take me for a while, about 2 months to get back as I whittle down that time frame. I spent a month just mailing books, trying to catch up on all the orders, and I appreciate the orders, but you can't do everything. So I'm a little bit behind on the emails. I'll try and get that down to 3 to 4 weeks as it used to be. And I do emails every day, so I do try and keep up. So ask for the document by topic or ask a question. Just be patient. I will get back to you. And if you wanted to find out about the book, as you mentioned, I have a generous excerpt of all 98 chapters of book 1, all 84 of book 2, and it's just a drop in the bucket of what's in the book. And if you wanted to buy a book, the best way is to go right over to the Buy Now page for book 1 or book 2. And on the buy now page for book 1 or book 2, there's a Canadian page, a US page, and an international page if you want to buy a signed copy. So if you're in the US, go to the US page. If you're in Canada, go to Canada. If you're anywhere else in the world, go to the international page and you can buy a signed copy for me. And the same for book 2. And there, you can link over to the Kindle edition from that buy page as well. There's an icon to get the digital. And there's a link over to barnesandnoble.com, and amazon.ca and amazon.com if you want to buy the book through them. I'm fine either way. I need the distribution. I just can't physically ship enough books to make it go. So that's the easiest way to get a hold of my book. And there's discounts on the website if you want to buy multiple books. So if you buy 2, there's a discount, and it's what I save on the shipping costs, because shipping is a very large expense. And if you wanted to get a discount for a mixed bundle, Stripe's not been able, and my website people have not been able to mix the bundles yet. But let's say you wanted 4 books as an example, and there's different quantity levels there, and you just buy 4 books of either book 1 or book 2, then send me an email at genesis6conspiracy@gmail.com. That's the contact the author page when you're sending me an email, and say, I want to get 2 of each or 3 of one, or if you want to buy just 2, I want 1 of each and I want them signed this way. Just send me that email. I'll wait a day or so waiting for emails to come in after people have made the purchase so that I can make sure that I'm shipping them what they want. So until I get that bundled connection where I think it'll have to be an extra page where we can do that, then that's the way you get the discount, by buying a mix of both books.
Excellent. Well,
one last thing. Audio has been, I'm confident in saying there'll be an audio book for book 1 by the end of June, maybe into July. It's going to be about 60 hours on the audio, and it's a complicated book, and that's why it's not been done before, but we're done. And it's going to be available through Amazon on ACX with another production company that's doing it. I'm not doing the reading. I don't have time for it. And book 2 will come out August or September on audio, and I'll have links to the audio up on my website when that happens.
All right, fantastic. Well, I highly suggest everybody go check that out. It is, once again, Genesis6conspiracy.com, and it is the number 6, Genesis 6 Conspiracy. Okay, well, we got some more to get to, but for all of you at home, if you'd like to check out the rest of this interview, head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a subscription today. It's only $10 a month or $100 a year. And if you can do it, I suggest the $100 a year because it's cheaper in the long run. Essentially, you get 2 months for free. Daily Renegade was created as a place to protect our videos against censorship because we were having videos, even entire channels deleted, which is why we typically only put the first part of interviews on YouTube, and then we do bonus questions for Daily Renegade members. Also, as an added perk with your membership, you will get early access to all videos. So, for example, if you're viewing this on YouTube, members of Daily Renegade have had access to this video since about 2 weeks ago. So head on over to dailyrenegade.com and get a membership, and we'll continue our conversation with Gary Wayne over there. If you're viewing on the website at dailyrenegade.com, just hang on the line. You don't have to do anything. And for everyone else viewing for free, thank you so much. Take care, and God bless.